Does linear periodization work? You're adding weight every single week and you're making progress. It seems like it works, but eventually you hit a wall. The whole process seems logical. There's a lot of gratification in this ability to make progress. So why does it stop working? Are you a powerlifter wanting to take it to the next level? Have you been in this for more than 2 years and your plan isn't working? Have you been stuck for more than 6 months without any progress? Then you need a change. I'm a powerlifting coach of the last 15 years and I take regular powerlifters to the next level. Whether that's taking records, going to nationals, an international competition, or wanting to go pro, jump over to my Instagram, shoot me a message, and let's see if we can work together and bring you on our coaching team. In this video, I'm going to explain to you when and when not to use linear periodization, why it works and why it doesn't work. And once we clarify that, I'm going to give you the tools you need that you can apply to your training to keep your progress going and where linear periodization fits into this. Linear periodization is an approach where you would start lighter and progressively go heavier. Now, it's done in a few ways. One, we either pick a lightweight, we add 5 kilos a week, 2 kilos a week, or we start at a lighter percentage of your 1RM and we just add a few percent a week. This is normally paired with starting with high reps, moving through to low reps. So start at 10 reps, at a certain percentage or weight, then progressing to 8, 6, 4, and so on. Or a shorter range of 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, or the commonly heard one, which is 5, 3, 1. Or a more intuitive approach that people might take is they will just pick a weight, work up to something that is heavy, then every single week add some sort of weight, until you can't do, say, a certain number of reps, then decrease reps and then keep adding weight until you're not making progress. Now, all this seems logical, right? It works with the way our mind works. We want to make progress every week. It's how we condition. Progress, make some sort of progress, any sort of progress every single week. So this idea of adding weight every week or reps is intuitive. And so it gets heavily ingrained. But eventually what you do experience is that it just stops working. You keep running through these cycles. You start light, go heavy, start light, go heavy, in attempts to try to break through that plateau. Or you just keep trying to go heavier and it fails. So what's going wrong here? Number one, you get too strong. When we get too strong, keeping up with this rate of intensity is hard to adapt to. It's a fairly intense approach for someone who is getting very strong. And we usually want a little bit of leeway, otherwise it introduces too much fatigue if we're always going the most amount of reps that we can do for the most amount of weight we can do and try to continuously add that. So as we move to more that intermediate to advanced lifter, we need to change our approach. So to dig deeper on why this happens, there are a few assumptions that linear periodization makes. One, it assumes that the max, our 1 rep max, is a fixed location, right? And we draw this line from point A to point B, and we force ourselves to fit in that line. The problem is that in reality, this number is imaginary. It moves every day based off our mood, stress, how we slept, and if we're actually adapting to the training, meaning that it gets stronger. So wherever this moves, if this moves up and we're on this assumed line of progression, we're understimulated, meaning that we don't have enough training or the right stimulus to actually make progress. Then on the other hand is if that 1RM is dropping, we are overreaching to the degree that we're unable to have enough, or we're unable to do enough volume because we introduce so much fatigue because we're overreached. So what tends to end up happening is that we end up spending too much time outside these ranges that we're either don't have enough stimulus, which we then can't make any adaptation, or we're overstimulated and we become fatigued. Next one is reason why it ends up working is adaptation resistance. Adaptation resistance is a lack of variety in the stimulus that you're getting. So if we follow, say, 5-3-1, it works, you make progress, do it again, it works and works and works, and it starts to slow down, stops working. Well, just like anything in life, let's say like this coffee, all right, that I have, if you're a person that doesn't have coffee, and I have one coffee, I get a lot of productivity out of it. But if you're like me, I like a lot of coffee. So I'll have 2 coffees to get more work done. Then I'll have 3 coffees because 2 coffees no longer work. Then I'll have 4 coffees. And then I adapt to it. My body gets resistant to its benefits, its stimulus. And not the best example, but move to another stimulant. Or in this context, I just stop drinking coffee and resensitize to it and make progress. Analogy can work in some contexts. But essentially what happens here is that our body is surviving against some sort of stress, which is an applied stimulus of your training. And your body comes to a level of homeostasis so that it doesn't want to make change. The body doesn't want to make change. So again, it gets this homeostasis because you're doing the same thing. You've already well adapted to it. You need to change the stimulus. Next is that especially as you advance, it's not specific enough. As we refine our skill, we need to work closer to what is required. Sounds logical, but it is not put in practice. So if you want to get good at 1 rep, well, you got to do 1 rep more often. The skill set behind doing 1 rep is very different to 2, 3, 4. Now you're not going to notice the difference if you're beginner to intermediate. You will notice a difference between the strategy of doing 1 rep and 10 reps. But as you get more advanced, you'll start to notice a difference between 1 rep, 2 reps, and 3 reps. So it's not about being perfectly bang on the exact stimulus. It's being as close as we can that is beneficial. So working at a much lower rep range is going to have more carryover to doing single reps than spending some time doing 10. We also need to be heavy enough. All right. If we're going too light too often, it's not going to add strength at that top end. Strength is very specific. And what we have to then also consider is that we can't go too heavy because, well, introduces too much fatigue. So we got to find this right balance, and that's the skill in programming. Next is finally what we call rate limiters. So this is other factors that impacting your ability to make continuous progression. So where linear periodization may work or may not work, but a rate limiter is something that is stopping you from expressing the stimulus that is required of you. So that's usually down to three things. One, skill lag, right? The strength your body has may not have the same, might not match the skill that you have. So if you're stronger than the technique that is able to sustain that much weight, then it becomes a technical breakdown, not a lack of strength. So then, depending on where that is, if that breakdown is too early from your max, then we don't get an opportunity to be in an ideal stimulus because of lack of skill. And this becomes really common as people advance, that they stop making progress because they stop advancing their technique, right? No matter how strong they get. Injury, current injuries, recent injuries, they limit our ability to, well, do enough work, enough quality work that will apply some sort of stimulus, which also can be due to a skill lag. But if there is a history on there, then we have to remove these rate limiters by, again, building a level of resilience and skill. Next is training age, right? Less specific, but it's a general skill that essentially, put it as like awareness of your body IQ, in a sense. You know where your body is in space. You have deep proprioception, and this just takes time. It's also part of skill. When does it work? Well, number one, as a beginner. All right, that's pretty clear now. Any stimulus works. Add weight every week, you'll make progress. But another time it still works for intermediate to advanced lifters, and it will always work during a rebuilding phase or after some time off. So if we've gone for an off season and we've worked on other areas of development and we come back, right, their baseline is going to be lower, we can use linear periodization, and we can do it quite aggressively to get them back up to a baseline. And the third time it usually works is a new variation. The variation can be even different rep ranges, working at lower rep ranges for a lot longer. We accumulate more volume rather than more weight or reps. This could be done through more sets. So again, there are different variables there. So if there is a limited application and there's a lot of things that can go wrong, why is it used so much? Well, first thing is that I think it's called the beginner illusion, right? It is very satisfying to make weekly progress. Adding weight is gamified. It's gamified, all right? You're making progress every single week and you tick. Now, this is a hurdle that I come across with every athlete, this transition between making progress very often to not making progress very often. And it becomes a hurdle at many levels. It happens at beginner to intermediate, and then there's another one stint usually between intermediate lifters and advanced lifters. There's always a big plateau that we have to not only physically work through, but mentally work through. Anyway, the beginner illusion is that there's this rate of satisfaction that we're gaining that is no longer occurring. Then we have this idea that something does work because anything works. And if anything works, I say 80% of the time, we assume that method will always work, but it doesn't. And so as athletes or customers or coaches, we see something that works, we think what we did worked, without considering the other variables, and then we apply that to everyone and wonder why it's not working. Seems like a logical process. All right, always either constantly progress or wave progress, and which leads into my third point, that is easy to sell. I would say the biggest reason why it's used a lot is it is a great marketing tool. I probably use it about still 50-60% of the time, but not all the time. Probably in an entire training phase, I might use it for 30%, 30 to 40% of the training before I move to other strategies. So this leads into what should you do? Number one, use autoregulation. Autoregulation is a subjective or objective external feedback or internal feedback that allows you to adjust your training load based off how it feels or a external form of validation. We would utilize something like RPE or RIR, which basically is a personal rating of your perceived exertion in relation to absolute failure. That proximity to failure is determined by how many reps it will take before I fail, which is why people always may use RIR, which is reps in reserve. Am I 1 rep from failure, 2 reps from failure? And that gives you an idea of where we need to be. Because that failure moves on a daily basis, using some form of autoregulation to allow ourselves to adjust to the ideal stimulus or back off enough to not introduce a huge amount of fatigue. Now, this takes a lot of practice. Next, undulating periodization. This is a form of fatigue management. The problem with linear periodization is that it's a high intensity exposure very frequently. To eventually we unable to recover from that amount of intensity. And undulating means that we just have less exposure to the higher ends of intensity, and we expose ourselves sometimes to lower ends, which allows us to develop other skills or maintain volume. So undulating periodization you might utilize, say, for something like deadlift. Deadlift is a very fatiguing lift, and it's very common practice that I might only expose someone to once or maybe twice in a week where they're going to go heavy, meaning like an 8 or a 9 RPE. And this allows us to then have the alternative weeks going much lighter, but not so light we're not getting stimulus, but not so much we're not introducing a huge amount of fatigue, or that the fatigue isn't impacting our ability to perform. The thing is, if we constantly went heavy, the accumulation of fatigue gets so high that our ability to perform drastically drops. Next method is using block periodization. I use this for probably 95% of my athletes, and there are different structures for it, but the most common structure is a 3-block strategy: acclimation, intensification, realization. And what it does is that you focus on smaller attributes of development in a single block of training before moving on to the next one, instead of trying to compress it all into this one linear progression. So the first step might be accumulating your capacity to work at a higher training volume. You might do this around, say, 7 RPE, maybe 8 RPE, where you're able to do more and more work and get conditioned to that, which then you move to the intensification block to expose yourself to more heavier loads at the same volume. Then move into the realization to work on the really high-end skill of it, exposing to much higher proximity to failure with a reduced volume to keep the fatigue out. using some sort of block periodization allows for you to be far more specific and, yeah, allows you to stage, maybe you can call it a longer form of linear periodization. Next is adding upper and lower constraints. Upper and lower constraints allows people to remove, or allows me to remove the subjectivity that comes from autoregulation. So some people may feel fatigued, but are really objectively not. This can be influenced by stress, changes in mood, anxiety, many things. So usually I can predict a rate of progression someone might take, and I'll know the upper end and the lower end of that progression. I'll give them a form of auto-regulation to move within inside that range. I might also give them, their perception of RP might also be different. So I'll give the accurate RPE version based off what I think they're going to fall in range, and an upper end, what they might perceive to be matching what I want to come out. So this matches what I know is true and what they perceive as true, and try to match that in the program. Now this takes, as a coach, it takes some skill, right? And as an athlete, it takes a bit of intuitiveness, time to develop, working with a good coach that can help you. Next is removing rate limiters. This is probably the biggest bottlenecks. Injuries is one. If you're injured, spend the time to rehab it. You're just not going to get the volume and intensity you need if you're hurt. Especially volume, you're just not going to be able to do the work. Then skill, your technique. If there is technical breakdown before you're able to max, then you need to identify what those areas are and address that skill. Working with a coach who has that ability to pick up that skill and work with you to make those changes will open up that capacity to continue to make progress. So sometimes rather than even moving to undulating or block periodization, you could just remove the rate limiters and open up that potential to make progress again. And another rate limiter, again, last one, is mindset. This is the person's perception. Now, obviously, we just discussed a few things about perception and people's understanding of what they're feeling compared to what I know what they should feel. The thing that gives up first is the mind. If the mind gives up first and we're unable to express what we need to express, or we already have doubt about weight we can already hit, then we've already failed. We are always better going in with the mindset that we are going to be able to achieve what is set out for me to do, and accept that we may fail, but we don't go in with that attitude. We accept that if it fails, it fails, right? At least we know. But if before that you said you were going to fail, then the likelihood of failure drastically increases. And there are many more examples with mindset. It's probably a thing I work a lot on with my clients. So linear periodization does work. It works at all levels. It's just misunderstood. And it feels like a very natural thing to do because it provides a high level of gratification. Progress is never linear, but it is more linear than people think. Progress happens on a bit of a bell curve. At a rate of probably about 2% a year is the slowest someone will progress. I know that because I've had clients for up to 8 to 10 years and been able to measure their average progress. And utilizing all these different variables of removing limitations, applying constraints, block periodization, undulation, these are the things that has allowed them to keep making progress. Now, 2% might not seem much, but if you've been in this for 4 or 5 years, that's a lot, because people will tend to stop making progress completely. And it won't happen at that exact rate, but they tend to happen in pulses where we'll get 8% one year, nothing next, then 10%. And that's because it can take up to a year to remove limitations. It can take up, and that's probably the major approach. Management of fatigue, ability to recover, applying constraints where needed, removing rate limiters, and this allows us to keep making progress year in, year out. Just have to remember that our perception of progression will change, and that we can't expect ongoing gratification for the training that we do, and learning to accept delayed gratification, where we might only have that ability to express that change every few months. And as you advance, that may take longer. So, look, thanks for coming, guys. Hope you enjoyed that. Please subscribe, like, comment. It helps me a lot. And I'll see you next time.